You're listening to Eating for Eden, episode 45.
When it comes to doing something about climate change, your food choices matter. Thanks for tuning in to Eating for Eden, a podcast that takes a food-first approach to climate action. I'm your host, Jessica J. Schroeder, and I am passionate about food that tastes good and does good. I'll guide you with practical tips and help you thoroughly enjoy your food along the way.
Quick note here right at the top. If my voice sounds different than usual, I apologize. Just coming out of a week of being sick. So any of you listening, if you're sick out there, I'm so sorry. Hope you get well soon. Seems like there's some nasty stuff going around lately. So that being said, I'll dive right in. As I noted in episode 23, when I talked about the power of beauty to change our minds and perhaps even our diets, facts alone don't always lead to change. But they can play an important role in the process of change. And even for those already committed to change, it can be helpful to be reminded of the facts. So in today's episode, I'm going to take us back through some of the essentials. First stop, overall climate impact of food as a sector. From a 30,000-foot view, food in general accounts for 26% of all global greenhouse gas emissions. That's a full quarter just from food. Most of those emissions, 77%, are from the food we eat, and the other 23% is due to food waste and loss. That means that there are things that we can do both about the food we eat and what doesn't get eaten in order to reduce our carbon footprint. That's right, too often we forget to talk about food waste. Zooming in, let's get more specific about how food is a whopping 26% of the problem. By far, the largest contribution food is making to climate change is methane production and release. This comes from several sources, but the biggest offender is livestock, especially cows. According to the Carbon Almanac, of the total emissions from food production, about 61% are due to livestock raised for meat and dairy. Let that sink in for a moment. Of all the kinds of foods on offer at grocery stores and restaurants alike, well over half of food-based emissions come from just these two animal-based categories, meat and dairy. Another contributor is food waste rotting in landfills. While many of us may expect that rotting food can just become compost and return to the soil, this doesn't happen in an environment where food waste is surrounded by plastic rather than organic matter. So instead of turning into a compost and nourishing the ground, food waste in a landfill just sits there rotting, emitting harmful methane gas. What's the big deal with methane? Isn't carbon dioxide the problem? Well, greenhouse gases are the problem. Methane is a powerful greenhouse gas. Like CO2, it traps heat from the sun, causing the sun's rays to warm the planet. And although methane doesn't stick around in the atmosphere for as long as CO2 does, methane's heat-trapping potential is 84 times that of CO2 over a span of 20 years. So in a time when imminent action is needed to prevent irreversible planetary impact, tackling major methane emitters can make a huge dent in helping achieve the crucial Paris Agreement targets for limits on global warming. Since CO2 will stick around longer than methane, we definitely need to take action to reduce our CO2 emissions. But cutting down on methane in a big way right now will help to avoid a speedier rate of warming. This is important because climate change impacts often work as a vicious cycle. The impacts of warming have consequences that in turn make climate change worse, and on it goes. Slowing warming now by reducing methane emissions now is an important step to take, and it's one we can take quite easily by attending to our food choices. Again, methane is emitted both during food production and through food waste rotting in landfills. With this in mind, we can implement solutions both at the front end and the back end of the food system and our involvement in it. After methane production, other food-related contributors to climate change include deforestation and land use. These two go hand in hand. As more land is required to either graze animals or grow food to feed them in feedlots, more forests are being cleared to make this possible. And did you notice that either or? Land is needed for raising livestock for food, regardless of whether it is commercial or grass-fed. Our world in data states that 60%, that's 60% of tropical deforestation is due to beef, soy, and palm oil production. And before anyone rails against tofu, let's remember that 77% of global soy is fed to livestock. Only about 7% of total global soy is used for direct human consumption in products like tofu, tempeh, soy milk, and edamame. Clearly, plant-based diets are not driving deforestation. Animal agriculture is. Okay, so land is cleared to graze more cattle who belch out tons of methane. That much is clear. Or to grow crops to feed livestock that are not being grazed. Or to produce palm oil to stuff into ultra-processed foods and other household products. While seeing rainforests cut down is obviously a tragic thing, what does the loss of trees in itself have to do with greenhouse gas emissions? Remember learning as a kid that we as humans breathe in oxygen and plants breathe in CO2? Plants, trees especially, draw down carbon out of the atmosphere and store it. We call these carbon sinks. Whenever forests are destroyed, huge amounts of greenhouse gases are emitted. So not only are the practices that deforestation is making way for emitting more greenhouse gases, the very act of deforestation itself is a huge emitter. With that review of food's impact overall, especially the massive impact of producing animal-based foods, let's talk now about the facts related to what we are recommended to eat instead. One of the world's top medical journals, The Lancet, formed a commission to develop dietary recommendations focused on both human health and planetary health. In their own words, the EAT-Lancet Commission addresses the need to feed a growing population a healthy diet while also defining sustainable food systems that will minimize damage to our planet. Great goal. I love it. The guidelines produced by EAT-Lancet are a great standard by which to estimate the relative sustainability of a given dietary pattern. According to Our World in Data, in 2017, in the United States, the average daily per capita supply of red meat was 185 grams. Of chicken, it was 153 grams. And of dairy, 698 grams. While this doesn't reflect actual consumption because it doesn't account for food waste, the stats are still highly relevant. What we produce is based on market demand, and what we produce affects the climate, whether it gets consumed or not. Comparing this data with the EAT-Lancet recommendations, the average supply per capita for the United States was over 1,300%. That's 13 times more red meat, over 5 times more chicken, and almost 3 times more dairy than was recommended by the Commission. In short, you don't have to eat 100% plant exclusive to do better than that. At bare minimum, purchasing and consuming less than these average amounts is still one small step in the right direction. Going one better, if you avoid red meat entirely, you will have omitted the top greenhouse gas emitters from your diet. Yet another step further, if you decide you're still going to consume some amount of animal products but lower your intake to the modest levels set by the EAT-Lancet Commission, which bases its recommendations on what is sustainable for the planet, that's even better. Check out show notes for links to learning more about the EAT-Lancet Commission, their recommendations, and so forth. But in making dietary changes, does it make sense to give up your local grass-fed beef or pasture-raised pork and chicken? Aren't these foods helping the environment since they're local? Let's bring some clarity to this important question. How much does eating local matter? For the most part, answering this question comes down to how much of a food's emissions come from transportation. This may surprise you. It certainly surprised me to learn this. But the transportation of a given food typically only accounts for less than 10% of its total carbon footprint. And that amount is actually far less than 10% for some of the biggest emitters, as we'll get to in a minute. The vast majority of a food's climate impact has to do with various other factors specific to the food item itself, such as land use change and farming practices. Additional potential factors aside from transport include animal feed, processing, retail, and packaging. According to an article by Dr. Hannah Ritchie of Our World in Data on this very topic, combined land use and farm stage emissions account for more than 80% of the footprint for most foods. Comparatively, she adds, transport is a small contributor to emissions. For most food products, it accounts for less than 10%. Dr. Ritchie further states, it's much smaller for the largest greenhouse gas emitters. In beef from beef herds, it's 0.5%. Taking beef from beef herds as an example, then, if only 0.5% comes from transportation, then 99.5% of emissions from beef are caused by other factors, most notably farm stage emissions, followed by land use change. If transportation only accounts for 0.5% of beef's emissions, does choosing local beef really make much of a difference? I realize that there are other values at play as well when considering whether to eat local. Supporting local is about relationships in the community, the local economy, and more. But from an environmental point of view, waving the local flag can be a bit of a distraction. Based on the science, eating locally has a relatively small impact compared to other steps we might take. So what would make a bigger impact? What can we do to lessen the other 90 to 99% of our food's emissions? Dr. Ritchie's conclusion is that it matters far more what we choose to eat than where that food comes from. Lessen the emissions of your food choices by choosing low-emission foods. Simply, that means choosing plants over animal products. Finally, to put a nail in the coffin of animal-based foods, let's take a look at the efficiency of producing animal foods versus plant foods. This is increasingly relevant in a world with a growing population whose farmable land continues to be threatened by myriad factors from droughts and fires to rising sea levels and untimely flooding to overspraying and overplanting and more. Considering the efficiency of animal products, for every 100 calories a cow eats, it only puts out 3 calories worth of meat. That means 97% of energy input was lost in conversion. Lambs don't fare much better at an output of only 4 calories of meat per 100 calories consumed. Pigs and chickens do a little better at 9 calories and 13 calories of meat, respectively, but those are not numbers to celebrate. These statistics indicate that each of these animals waste more than 85% of their calories when it comes to the efficiency of feeding a hungry and warming world. For a bit of additional perspective, 46%, so nearly half, of all habitable land is used for agriculture. Of that land, 77% is used for livestock grazing and animal feed. That means that only 23% of all agricultural land is used to grow crops, not used for animal feed. That's where crops for direct human consumption fit in. When we compare what proportion of our calories are provided from animal foods versus plant foods, only 18% of our calories globally come from animal-based foods, while the other 82% of the world's calories come from plants. So to clarify, we use a whopping 77% of our global agricultural land to produce only 18% of our calories? I'm not a mathematician, but that seems to be an unwise use of our land, water, and energy, especially in a time when imminent action is needed to curb emissions and significantly slow warming and its effects. In simplified terms, we all get our energy from the sun. However, since we can't perform photosynthesis like plants, we can't get our energy directly from the sun. We need to consume our energy from something else that gets its energy from the sun. Enter plants. Plants get their energy from the sun, and they convert it into forms we can access: proteins, fats, and carbohydrates. Animals also get their energy from the sun through eating plants. When we eat animals or animal products, we get the sun's energy from the plants that the animal ate by eating the animal itself, or the animal's byproducts. But when we eat animals, we're an extra step removed from the sun. The chain of consumption goes like this: sun, to plants, to animals, to us. Plants get their energy directly from the sun. Eating plants directly means we are only one step removed from the sun as an energy source. Sun, to plants, to us. When we eat animals or animal products, however, we are 2 steps removed. Think of eating plants as buying direct, getting our energy direct from the source, while animals serve as middlemen, bringing us energy 1 additional step removed. And remember how inefficient. Only 3 calories for every 100 calories that a cow eats. Okay? Let's cut out the middlemen, the middle cows, and choose plants for their low emissions and their efficiency of producing energy for direct human consumption. I hope you enjoyed reviewing the facts with me today. I always find it grounding, no pun intended, to get back to the basics. I hope that you consider who you might share this episode with, whether it's a friend who's new to this conversation or who might just want a nice refresher as well. We all need reminders every now and again. If you have questions or want to suggest a topic for a future episode, I would love to hear from you. Send an email to edenandme@substack.com. Also, if you've been enjoying this podcast, please consider leaving a review. I'd love to grow the reach of the podcast in 2025, and I need your help to do so. Thank you in advance. If you want recipes, head over to edenandme.com, where you can find a variety of delicious recipes to bring what you're learning into the kitchen. Finally, become an email subscriber on Substack if you want to have new podcast episodes delivered right into your inbox. And if you appreciate the work I'm doing and want to support the show, you'll have an option of becoming a paid subscriber. That's all for now, friends. Until next time, be well.
Thanks for listening to Eating for Eden. If you found this episode informative or inspiring, please consider sharing it with a friend. Climate change is an issue we all need to tackle together, so let's invite others to journey along with us as we continue the conversation and start taking action. Until next week, friends, take care.